First of all, thanks for coming in. To Teddy, in the different groups you set up, has anyone looked at putting in proper fencing between farms and forestry that would basically stall some of them eating most of the grass and maybe spreading infection in the deers? Say Newbridge in County Galway, you talked about a few places there, but Newbridge in County Galway, there's roads at night now you kind of travel on with the herds of them that's going around the place. Going by your talk, and with the best will in the world, and I'd be fairly familiar with the Wildlife Act, it's 2 years, like with the push, even before you'd probably see fairly good results. Would that be fair to say, going by what you were saying, and changing, like, some of the people that we'd be looking to change bits of legislation with mightn't be pushing it as fast as we'd want, with some of the agendas that would be being pushed in here? And I would be concerned that legislation would be holding you up, or, you know, do you fear that is a roadblock? At the moment, if communities basically got together, is there a way of taking them out, shooting them, blast them, if they put the resources, if the community done something themselves, because it's ferocious. And to Conor, there was a story out a few weeks ago, I don't know, a month ago, on the Journal about regionalisation. Is that gone to bed now, that you could be not able to sell cattle if you were in a certain area? Is that sort of gone away from? And in relation to the badgers, has the vaccination worked with the badgers? Because we're hearing mixed stories that it didn't appear to, and to be nice to know, like, has it worked or hasn't it worked? And if it hasn't worked, or if it is working, is there a lot of it going on at the moment? How much vaccination is going on at the moment? Because I'm hearing there isn't much going on of vaccinating the badgers. I think the big problem for ye in any TB breakdown is that and it's no reflection on ye, is that you don't have enough of boots on the ground. That's your problem in the line of a budget, in my opinion. Because when you look for someone, when you get a breakdown of TB in an area, even for snaring the badgers or trying to get them, sure, there's like one person that will come out, but sure, the poor devils that want to make 40 out of themselves to be in 40 different places. And it's an awful problem. I think you need more resources if you're going to tackle this head on. And to Conor as well, I'd have been preparing a small bit for this morning on the figures, in the line of the TB resistance, am I right in saying that the department's figures, if you were to say Ireland was free of TB, is 300 herds or 15,000 cattle? Is that the guides that you look at as being TB free? Because that's the information that I've been given. I've been told by people that would look at the Vits, I spoke to some in England and I spoke to them here in Ireland that would have done a lot of research. You'd probably know some of them. That most cattle killed don't have TB in the line of going through the lungs and going through the blood. That there's a lot of cattle that goes in and they might show the lumps or whatever, but when they go into the factory, it wouldn't be basically full-blown TB. Am I right in saying that with the best will in the world, that if you were doing everything right, putting every deer everywhere and eliminating that side of it, because that is a problem, The badgers are a problem, we know that, but you could have cattle within the shed all the time, and if they come under stress, especially on the dairy side, TB can start in them. Is that right or wrong? And if that's the case, then sure, is there, or are they looking at, the information I have is that there's no vaccine that you'll just get rid of TB, but is there like the MRAs that might stall it a bit, or, you know, the COVID one or whatever you want to call it, something of the equivalent to that, that the makeup of a person in a vaccine and the makeup of an animal or a bullock or a cow is totally different. In relation to the farmers, that is the pedigree side of it solved with the, you know, where there was, you could have a fairly valuable animal and there was only a certain figure. Has agreements been reached on the likes of that for the farmers? And the last part of I believe that manpower is a big problem for you. You know, in fairness, I think there needs to be more funding put towards that to tackle into it and try and basically resolve it as quick as possible, because it's a hellish sort of problem for farmers. But the question I'd say to you is, and one last question to Conor, you can, or indeed Damien, the definition, you'll hear people saying we'll eradicate TB and we'll have it gone. Realistically, that'll never happen. Them are my questions.
Okay. Terry, and then next, yeah. Hi, Terry.
Okay, just to respond to a few of your comments, Deputy Fitzmaurice. In relation to the fencing one was discussed, but it didn't come up as a main recommendation because it isn't seen as being entirely effective over time. It's a short-term fix, and not too many people involved felt it was going to solve the thing. I know the forestry section of the department there's the fencing grants in forestry for about 18 million this year approved, as far as I know, for new forestry. But overall fencing doesn't appear to be totally effective, and I don't feel it is.
The only thing I'd say back to you, and the forestry will tell you that, because it's their forest that's bringing them deers into our land.
Well, fair enough. The issue is, when it comes to deer, I suppose that the point I make to a lot of people around deer is the fact that they're a wild animal, and their responsibility, and this isn't a very point that people like to hear, but it's what I'm being told is the deer belong to wherever they are at the time. So that's basically it. So they're your responsibility if they're on your land. If they're in Quilta's land, they're in Quilta's responsibility, or Parks and Wildlife, whatever the case may be. Now, just you mentioned around the 2 years, and I suppose you're right to an extent that, you know, ramping up a programme is going to take a period of time. There's no doubt about that. There's about 55,000 deer being shot in Ireland annually at the moment, based on what figures we've available to us. It has gone up from about 36,000, and they are the returns that the registered hunters send back when they apply for their licences the following year. Somewhat of an arbitrary figure, but it is the figure we have, about 55.
Can you go back on the meat? You mentioned about a fact, or about restaurants, the way that we might be able to help in that.
Yeah. At the moment, if you want to sell, if a deer hunter wants to sell meat into a restaurant, the maximum he can sell in is 3 deer per annum.
Three.
Whereas in the UK it's 3,000. I'm researching it at the moment, and that's the thing. Give you an answer.
They're under the Wildlife Act, or what's that under?
That's under an act in the Department of Agriculture, the SI. And
you imagine an SI can be struck out with the stroke of a biro, like.
Well, it's something we need to progress. So I'll put it that way. So I can't say any more about that as much as I know. So, but it is an issue. It was raised in this process, so I'm bringing it further. Do you know what I mean? And I'm learning about it. So as I said, I'm brought in this. The one point I would make to you that I think is important on the deer one, as I said to you in this one, it's a cross-departmental process here. The Parks and Wildlife Service are involved, and Quilter are involved, and I'm engaging with them at the highest level on an ongoing basis, and they're very much keen to up their engagement with deer management on their lands. And they have been suffering for the last few years as well, very much from the point of view of lack of boots on the ground, as you said. And I know in Wicklow they're piloting a whole project this year of bringing in contract hunters in parts of Wicklow after Christmas this year, and they're hoping to roll that around the country. No, they haven't done it yet, but they're hoping to do it, and they tell me they're doing it. I'm meeting Quilta next week, and I'm looking for them to do something similar in that scenario. So if the main bodies can ramp up on one side, that'll be a quick fix fairly quickly to get,
had you any tie-up with gun clubs? Because I remember one time ago on Sundays there'd be a fox hunt, it'd be on foot, and they'd have dogs, and they'd drive them out and they'd get them. Is there any of that done?
The gun clubs have been central to this process from the point of view of developing the whole the thoughts and process around this. The NARGC is the Association of National Gun Clubs. They've been very involved in the process I spoke to you about in South Galway. They were involved in the different committees we had as well, as were all the other hunting organisations, the likes of the Irish Deer Commission, the Irish Deer Society, the Deer Alliance, the Wild Deer Association. There's quite a few of them out there that are involved with deer management. The point to be made, I suppose, around deer is it's registered hunters, and there are 6,000 registered hunters for deer that have licence for hunters that are licensed as of 2023. It's registered hunters you need who are able to do the proper deer stalking. And it's to tie up the local people with the proper registered hunters to get the job done. And I think if you get deer management units set up and you get a goodwill going, you can get a lot done in a short space of time, without a whole lot of money to begin with. It's to get it to the next phase, where you have a really large number to be taken out, where you need to probably put incentives in place. I would see one of the log jams coming here is the dealing with the venison coming out of this if you start to accelerate the cull. That's something we'll need to address immediately after Christmas as to what options need to be done around that one.
Pet food surely be an option.
Pardon?
Pet food would surely
Surely,
be an option.
all options will be investigated, to be honest with you. Will have to be investigated if you have large numbers out there. On the legislation one, I don't see the legislation one being a major impediment. It'll be a help, but it's not going to be a solution. It's another plank, but it's not going to be the big plank. The big plank is getting a coordinator out there, getting up and running, getting people involved. We have people, all the people, the stakeholders have been involved in the process so far. We need to get involved on the ground as well. And I think if we keep the momentum going, we can do that. Okay, I think that's it.
I might ask John to talk about regionalisation. I think there's a number of questions that Damien will cover, and I finish up with the pedigree proceedings. Thanks, Deputy.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Maybe I'd just start actually by the last question that you had, whether eradication is possible or not. And I think certainly from a scientific point of view, there's absolutely no reason why we can't eradicate tuberculosis in cattle. And indeed, tuberculosis has been eradicated in many countries. So in the European Union, the vast majority of countries, are free. And the actual legal requirement is 0.2% of herds. So we've about 100,000 herds. So we need to get less than 200 to be declared free. But most of the European countries are at that stage. So I think certainly there is no reason, as I said, from a scientific point of view.
What are they doing different than John?
Well, I suppose some of them, have eradicated the disease a number of years ago, but basically they're using the tools that we are using. I suppose one of the difference is that, they didn't have a wildlife problem with badgers and other wildlife that we have, and indeed the countries that are finding it difficult now to eradicate, like Spain, they have identified a wildlife problem as well, in terms of boar and deer and so forth. So I suppose that's certainly one of the issues. But as I said, most of them have eradicated with the tools available. And, indeed Spain, even though it has a wildlife problem, is certainly a good bit lower than us in terms of the levels.
What's the definition of eradication? Am I right in saying, it's not zero, it's 0.2%?
Yeah, I think we need to be really careful in terms of how we define eradication. It's a really good question, because there's kind of legal eradication, which means if it's below a certain level in the population, so it's 0.2% of the population. But that's not biological eradication, because if you've got if you've still got TB in your population, it can still rise if you take your foot off the pedal. So we're really looking for biological eradication, where we actually completely get rid of the disease. That's ultimately the goal, but I think it's important to distinguish between those 2 points. So just to go on to the other point then about the regionalisation. So I suppose I'd just very briefly like to mention the role of my group. I'm head of the scientific working group in the TB Forum. And basically we get questions from the TB Forum itself or from the Department of Agriculture, you know, to look from a scientific point of view at particular issues. So we look at those, we kind of review all the science and we provide information. But I think it's important to say that we're not advocating, you know, regionalisation or anything else that we're asked to look at. We just provide the information, and then it's for the Department of Agriculture or for the Forum to decide what to do with it. But in terms of regionalisation, so basically the idea is that you take a particular part of the country initially, and then you'd work that, and then you'd move on to other parts. And indeed, that's how the eradication programme started in Ireland. So in 1954, Sligo and Clare were the first counties, you know, that were identified for TB eradication. And then it gradually spread to the rest of the western counties and then to the rest of the country, to the point where in 1965 we declared ourselves legally free of tuberculosis, so a regional approach was used. And indeed, if we look at other countries, like most countries actually do use a regional approach in terms of...
My question, my understanding was you couldn't sell cattle only local. Is that what that was proposed, no?
Not exactly. So basically, if you're to use a regional approach, you've got to do two things. First of all, you've got to get rid of TB in the region. But secondly, then you've got to stop infection from coming into that region, because there's no point in getting rid of the infection and then have loads of infection coming back in. So you've got to meet those two requirements. Now, to meet the first requirement, you know, we're talking about high quality testing and things like that to get rid of the disease. But to prevent it from coming back in, you basically have to prevent the two main sources of TB for herds, and they are wildlife and other cattle. So, you know, you've got a good wildlife programme in place, like Teddy was talking about, in terms of deer or badgers. But I suppose the main constraint really is other cattle. So I think it would be the view of our working group that the main method of transmission of TB in Ireland is transmission between cattle. And so, you know, in our study, on the regionalisation study, we found that there was quite a lot of movement of cattle from high-risk herds to low-risk herds. And obviously, you know, if you're to have a successful eradication programme, you need to deal with that. So by high-risk herd, I mean a herd maybe that just recently had an outbreak of tuberculosis and has just gone free. But, I mean, there's loads of evidence to show that those herds can still have some infected animals because the test isn't 100%. So you can have still some infected animals in those herds.
Is the blood test 100%?
Pardon?
Is the blood test 100%?
No, the blood test isn't 100%. They're both about, if they're done correctly, they're both about 80%. So both the blood test and the skin test will identify 80%. Maybe the blood test might be slightly better. But the problem with the blood test is that it will pick up a lot of false positive animals. So you will get quite a number of false positive animals with the blood test. So that's why it can't be used, you know, as a screening test, because we get too many false positives.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Is there more?
Conor, sorry.
I'll take the question on vaccination. I think you asked how much vaccination is going on, and I think it's also worth. I'll also mention about culling. This year to date, we've captured over 8,000 badgers for vaccination, and that has increased from about 1,900 in 2019. And we've culled over the last few years since 2019, apart from 2020, where there was a bit of a reduction because of COVID. We're culling of the order between 5,000 and 6,000 badgers in high incidence areas. So if there is a high risk breakdown in a particular region, badgers are culled, and then there's the vaccination goes on in parallel. You made the point there about the manpower, and this year we've gone. We're supported on the ground. We have our own technical agricultural officers who supervise subcontractors from the Farm Relief Service that actually do the work on the ground. They've increased the supervision of the Farm Relief, have gone from 2 to 3 per technical agricultural officer. So there's an increase in the manpower there. You may also be aware that there have been issues around the technical agricultural officers' vacancies there, and a lot of good work has been done this year in addressing those vacancies. It's not completely fixed yet, but things are a lot better than they were this time last year. But I think it's worth pointing out that no matter how many people the Department of Agriculture put out on the ground, it's probably an impossible task to fully identify all sets. Like we're relying on the farming community to tell us about the location of sets, and one thing that we're aiming to have next year in the BIS maps, we're hoping that all identified sets are going to be on the BIS maps when they're issued next year, so that people, if they're not aware of sets on their land, that they will become aware of. But we want to know where they are. But in spite of all that, and we will never have all the manpower there, we're asking farmers to fence off sets, and it's not about keeping badgers in sets. It's about preventing that close contact, that area immediately outside a set where the badgers are defecating and urinating. That's high risk material, and if you could stop cattle from grazing that grass that's contaminated, that'd go a long way. We're also asking that farmers would badger-proof their farmyards, because there's feeds like maize and beet and open that are particularly palatable to badgers, that they're particularly fond of it. And if like people have to have those feeds, yes, but if they could at least keep them in a way that the badgers can't access them. So could you clarify your question on TB resistance? Sorry.
Yeah, like what I'm hearing is that, okay, there is certain cattle, and they wouldn't have to be near a badger, or they wouldn't have to be near a deer. They could be within a shed, and when they come under stress, they could show up with TB. Is that correct?
They have to have got it from somewhere. And cattle to cattle transmission, like I think we can't. Cattle to cattle transmission is something that we're probably not dealing with enough. Like the spread within species is far greater than the spread between species. So spread between badgers is greater than spread from badgers to cattle, and spread between cattle is greater than spread between badgers and cattle, if you follow me. And those animals, if they didn't get it out of nowhere, and you may well have animals that are latently infected, are allergic, that may not react to the test, and this is a feature of this disease, that certain animals don't react to it. The long-standing animals that probably pose the greatest risk, they may not necessarily react. So there is an animal, there has to be a source somewhere. So in
What about a vaccine?
Okay, sorry, we have a vote, so Tim, you take the chair. Are you voting, Michael?
Yeah, what's it on?
It's on the Mayor of Limerick. So Tim will take the chair,
I don't know, we can,
and we'll come back as soon as our vote is over.
we'll swap across with you if you want.
This is the vaccine for cattle.
Yeah, you mentioned early on, when you were speaking early on about the, say, with a vaccine for TB, and it was mentioned that it would be dangerous in the line of, you were saying, with other countries and that you have to be careful how you go.
Yeah.
But is there anything that will be foolproof coming, or is it just basically you eliminate the problems outside to try and eliminate TB in the badgers, in the deers and all of that?
Yeah.
The yard one is actually a very interesting one for, I think farmers should know that more in basically making a yard in a way that badgers cannot be coming in.
Yeah. The issue about it's a certification thing, and like there's politics involved in this, and there's international politics, and you may well be aware like that animal health from time to time may be used as I won't use the term of trade barrier, but it's I think you know where I'm going here. The phytosanitary rules may be used to certain countries' advantage, and I think we need to get the support of the WOA, World Organization of Animal Health, to overcome that issue.
Okay, thanks for